A family left their home one morning. They packed nothing. They said goodbye to no one. And they never came back. Not for a day, not for a week, not for a year. For years would pass before anyone found what was left of them. Deep inside a stretch of wilderness in rural Oklahoma, where the trees grow tall and the cell signal disappears, and where, on a crisp October afternoon in 2009, Bobby, Sherilyn, and little Madison Jamison simply ceased to exist. No struggle, no witnesses, no answers. Just a truck, parked on the side of a dirt road. Engine off, doors closed. Everything inside, phones, wallets, cash, their dog, abandoned as if the family had stepped out for a moment and forgotten to return. This is the Jamison family case. And after 15 years, it remains one of the most disturbing, most confusing, and most deeply unsettling disappearances in American history. Buckle in, because this story doesn't get easier. It only gets stranger. To understand what happened to the Jamisons, you first have to understand who they were. Bobby Dale Jamison was 44 years old in 2009. He was a broad-shouldered man, quiet by nature, the kind of guy who kept to himself in the way that small-town Oklahoma men often do. He had rough hands from years of labor and a manner that people who knew him described as serious, not cold, but serious. Like he was always thinking about something he hadn't told you yet. His wife, Sherilyn Leanne Jamison, was 40 years old. Friends described her as warm but guarded. She had a smile that lit up a room when she chose to use it, and a sharp mind that she didn't always let people see. She was Bobby's partner in every sense of the word. They were the kind of couple that faced the world as a unit, for better or worse. And then there was Madison Renee Jamison, 6 years old, bright eyes, a little girl who, by all accounts, was deeply loved by both of her parents. The family lived in Eufaula, Oklahoma, a small town in the eastern part of the state, sitting on the shores of Lake Eufaula. It's the kind of place where everyone knows your name, where trucks far outnumber sports cars, and where the nearest Walmart is a 20-minute drive. Life there was simple, and for the Jamisons, it was also hard. Bobby worked in construction and odd jobs. Money was a constant source of stress. The family was dealing with financial pressures that had been building for months, maybe years. There were reports of disputes, tension in the household, the slow grinding pressure that economic instability puts on a family over time. But there was something else going on too. Something that would only become clear in hindsight. People who were close to the Jamisons, neighbors, extended family, acquaintances in town, began to notice changes in the months leading up to October 2009. Bobby had become increasingly paranoid. He was convinced, sources say, that someone was out to get him. Not in a vague, anxious way, but specifically, he believed people were watching his house, watching his family, planning something. He reportedly reached out to a pastor. He spoke about spiritual warfare. He talked about evil forces that he felt were closing in on him and his family. Now, was this paranoia? Was it mental illness? Was it the product of extreme stress? Was it something else entirely? We'll come back to that. Because here's the thing about the Jamison family. Every time you think you understand what was happening with them, another layer peels back. And underneath it, something darker. In the fall of 2009, Bobby Jamison was in the process of trying to purchase a piece of land. The property was located in the Latimer County area of Oklahoma, a remote, heavily forested stretch of land deep in the San Juan Mountains. This is not suburban wilderness. This is genuine backcountry, dense tree cover, winding dirt roads, elevation changes, minimal infrastructure. The kind of terrain that swallows things. The kind of terrain that keeps secrets. Bobby wanted to build a small cabin there. According to people close to the family, he had been visiting the property multiple times, scouting it, planning. On October 8, 2009, the Jamison family drove out to that property together. That is the last confirmed sighting of them alive. But before we get to what happened in those woods, before we get to the truck, the money, the dog, and the haunting footage, I need to tell you something about Bobby's truck. Because when investigators later searched the vehicle, they found something unusual. A GPS device. And when they downloaded the data from that GPS, they discovered that in the weeks and months before the disappearance, Bobby Jamison had been making repeated trips to this same remote area. Over and over. almost as if he was preparing something or looking for something. What was he doing out there? Nobody knows. But hold that question, because there's more. Inside the truck, there was also a bag. And inside that bag, investigators found approximately $32,000 in cash. $32,000. Left in the truck, untouched, along with the family's cell phones, Bobby's wallet, Sherilyn's purse, and their dog, a red-nosed pit bull who was found in the vehicle, severely malnourished, having clearly been there for days. Think about that for a second. A family doesn't leave $32,000 behind by choice. A family doesn't leave their phones, their wallets, their dog. Something happened. Something that made leaving all of that behind seem like the only option, or no option at all. This is the part of the Jamison case that changes everything. When investigators began looking into the family's disappearance, they pulled security camera footage from the Jamison home, footage from just before the family left for the property that October. And what they saw was deeply, profoundly disturbing. The footage shows Bobby and Sherilyn Jamison moving back and forth between their house and their truck. They are loading items, boxes, bags, supplies. Normal enough on the surface. Except they are moving like they're not entirely there. I want you to picture this carefully, because words don't fully capture it. These are not people in a hurry. They are not distressed in an obvious way. They are not arguing. They are not crying. They are not looking over their shoulders. They are moving with a kind of blank, mechanical repetition. Slow, deliberate, eyes forward or downward. No communication between them that investigators could identify. No interaction with each other. No expressions that suggest thought or emotion. One criminologist who reviewed the footage described it as looking like people in a dissociative state. Like the lights were on, but nobody was home. And it wasn't just for a moment. This went on for an extended period, multiple trips back and forth. Both Bobby and Sherilyn displaying the same eerie, vacant behavior. Law enforcement officials who watched the footage later said it was one of the most unsettling things they had seen in the context of a missing persons case. Not because of what the footage showed happening, but because of what it seemed to suggest was happening inside these two people's minds. Now, what causes a dissociative state like that? There are several possibilities, and all of them are dark. The first possibility is drugs, specifically methamphetamine, which has historically had a significant presence in rural Oklahoma. High-dose stimulant use can produce exactly the kind of behavioral profile you see in that footage. Vacant affect, repetitive movement, apparent disconnection from immediate reality. There were rumors in the community. Nothing was ever confirmed. But investigators noted this as a possibility. The second possibility is severe acute psychological distress. If both Bobby and Sherilyn were in the grip of a shared terror, if they believed, genuinely believed, that something catastrophic and inescapable was about to happen to them, that kind of extreme fear response can produce dissociative symptoms. The nervous system shuts down everything non-essential. People go on autopilot. The third possibility is something rarer and stranger. In 1994, a French psychiatrist named Lissay and his colleague Fallret documented a condition they called folie à deux, madness of two. A shared delusional disorder in which two people, usually in close intimate contact, develop and reinforce the same delusion together. The condition is real. It's documented. And its symptoms can include exactly the kind of behavioral changes that people around the Jamisons had noticed in the months leading up to their disappearance. The paranoia, the belief in external threats, the social withdrawal, the spiritual fixation. Could Bobby and Sherilyn Jamison have been suffering from a shared psychotic break? Could they have been convinced, both of them, together, of something so frightening that it drove them into the woods and didn't bring them back? There is no diagnosis. There is no psychiatric record. There is only that footage, and the questions it refuses to answer. When the truck was found on October 16, 2009, 8 days after the family had left for the property, law enforcement mobilized quickly. The Latimer County Sheriff's Office led the search. They brought in additional units, search dogs, volunteers. The terrain, as I mentioned, was brutal. Dense forest, steep hillsides, creek beds, rocky outcroppings. The kind of landscape that hides things even when you're looking directly at them. Helicopters swept the area. Ground teams combed through the brush. The search went on for days. They found nothing. No clothing. No campsites. No signs of struggle. No remains. No indication of where the family had gone after leaving the truck. The case went cold. For months. Then a year. Then 2 years. The community didn't forget. Small towns rarely do. But without new leads, without new evidence, without any concrete direction to pursue, the investigation stalled. Bobby's father, Bob Jamison Sr., refused to accept that his son's family was simply gone. He continued to push. He spoke to media. He kept the case in the public consciousness as best he could. He offered his own theories. He grieved, loudly and persistently, in the way that parents of missing people often do when they have nothing else they can do. And then, in August 2013, nearly 4 years after the Jamison family disappeared, a deer hunter was moving through the same remote stretch of San Juan Mountains. And he found bones, human skeletal remains, scattered across the forest floor, accompanied by clothing and personal effects. Human skeletal remains, scattered across the forest floor, accompanied by clothing and personal effects. The remains were sent for forensic analysis. DNA testing confirmed what many had feared and some had hoped was not true. The bones belonged to Bobby, Sherilyn, and Madison Jamison. The entire family was dead. And now, for the first time, investigators had physical evidence to work with. Now they could try to answer the questions that had haunted this case for 4 years. Except they couldn't. The medical examiner who examined the remains was unable to determine a cause of death. Let me say that again, because it's important. After 4 years in the wilderness, the bones were significantly degraded. Exposure, animals, weather, all of it had done its work. The physical evidence, such as it was, could not tell investigators how the Jamisons had died. Was it exposure? Starvation? An accident? A fall? Violence? Impossible to say. The case was reopened with renewed urgency. Investigators went back to square one. They re-interviewed witnesses. They re-examined the truck. They went back through Bobby's communications, his financial records, his history. And what they found raised more questions than it answered. Bobby had reportedly been involved in a serious dispute with his own father, Bob Sr., over property and finances. The relationship had apparently deteriorated badly in the period before the disappearance. There were allegations, accusations, the kind of bitter family conflict that can escalate in ways nobody anticipates. Investigators looked at this. They looked hard at it. No charges were ever filed. There was also renewed attention paid to the $32,000 found in the truck. Where had that money come from? A man struggling financially doesn't accumulate that kind of cash through conventional means. And if he had it, why was it still in the truck? Why wasn't it gone? No satisfying answer emerged. In the absence of definitive answers, theories have proliferated, and they range from the tragically mundane to the genuinely extraordinary. Theory 1. Exposure and misadventure. The most straightforward explanation is also, in some ways, the most painful. The Jamisons drove to the property, got out of the truck, and became disoriented in the wilderness. The terrain is brutal. The San Juan Mountains are not forgiving. If the family, possibly already in some kind of altered psychological state, wandered into the forest without adequate supplies or navigational tools, they could have become lost within minutes. Hypothermia is a silent killer. It progresses quickly in the right conditions. Disorientation becomes confusion, becomes unconsciousness. The family might simply have walked until they couldn't walk anymore. This theory is supported by the location of the remains, found not far from where the truck was parked. If the family had been fleeing someone or being transported somewhere, you'd expect the remains to be further away. But it doesn't explain the vacant behavior on the security footage. It doesn't explain the $32,000. It doesn't explain the repeated GPS visits to the property. Theory 2. Drug-induced psychosis. As mentioned earlier, investigators never ruled out the possibility that one or both adults were under the influence of drugs at the time of the disappearance. Methamphetamine psychosis, in particular, can produce extreme paranoia, hallucinations, and the kind of detached, mechanical behavior visible in the security footage. If both Bobby and Sherilyn were experiencing drug-induced psychosis, They might have fled into the woods believing they were escaping a threat that wasn't there. But this theory has never been confirmed. No drug paraphernalia was found in the truck. No toxicology was possible given the state of the remains. It remains speculation. Theory 3. Cult involvement. This theory has gained significant traction online and in true crime communities, and it's not entirely without basis. Bobby Jamison had reportedly been in contact with a pastor in the period before his death. He had spoken about spiritual warfare. Some accounts suggest that the family had become involved with a religious group whose beliefs were, to put it gently, unorthodox. There are unconfirmed reports that Bobby had received a letter written in an unusual script, possibly in tongues, in the days before the disappearance. There are suggestions that the family had begun to believe they were under supernatural attack. Could the Jamisons have been involved with a group that encouraged or facilitated their disappearance? Could they have gone to the woods for a ritual purpose? There is no direct evidence for this. But the circumstantial details, the paranoia, the spiritual fixation, the unexplained cache, the deliberate trips to a remote location, have kept this theory alive. Theory 4. Murder. Some investigators and family members have never been satisfied that this was an accident. The unexplained cache, the family dispute, the remoteness of the location, these are details that, to some people, point to foul play. Could the Jamisons have been lured to the property? Could someone have known they would be there? Could the family's death have been deliberate? There was an investigation. There were persons of interest. There were allegations. But without a cause of death, without physical evidence of violence, without a clear suspect and a clear motive that could be proven, no charges were ever filed. The case remains officially unsolved. Theory 5. Psychological collapse. Perhaps the darkest theory, and perhaps the most human. The Jamisons were under enormous pressure. Financial stress, relationship strain, paranoia, possible mental illness, possible substance issues. What if, on that October morning, something finally broke? What if the accumulated weight of everything, the fear, the debt, the distrust, the belief that forces both human and otherwise were closing in, became simply too much? What if the Jamisons went into those woods not because they were running towards something, but because they had given up on everything behind them? I don't raise this to be cruel. I raise it because it is one of the possibilities that investigators have considered. And because, when you look at that security footage, when you watch these two people moving through their yard like sleepwalkers, like people who have already said goodbye, it becomes very, very hard to dismiss. Here is what we know for certain about the Jamison family. On October 8, 2009, Bobby, Sherilyn, and 6-year-old Madison Jamison left their home in Eufaula, Oklahoma. Their truck was found 8 days later on a remote dirt road in the San Bois Mountains of Latimer County. Inside, all of their personal belongings, $32,000 in cash, and their dog. In August 2013, their remains were found approximately 2 miles from the truck. The cause of death was never determined. The case has never been solved. Here is what we don't know. We don't know what the $32,000 was for. We don't know why Bobby had been visiting that property so many times before the final trip. We don't know what the family was thinking in those final hours, whether they were afraid, whether they were at peace, whether they were aware of what was happening to them. We don't know why a 6-year-old girl never came home. What I keep coming back to, what I think about when I think about this case, is that security camera footage. Those two people, moving back and forth in their own yard, loading their own truck, and looking utterly, completely elsewhere. Like they were already gone before they left. Like whatever had taken hold of the Jamison family had done its work before the woods ever got the chance. Bobby was 44. Sherilyn was 40. Madison was 6. Their names were the Jamisons. And today, 15 years later, nobody knows what happened to them in those woods. Nobody knows what they saw.